In case you haven't seen it yet, Jagex released a blog post about the summer sweep up, where they go over a couple of things they want to change. So all of these things that I'm going to be talking about, even if I talk about as them already being changed, they're still going to happen in this blog post just to inform the players and gather feedback. And well, I am here to provide some of that feedback because I'm here to discuss those changes. I'm not gonna go extensively over every single thing in the blog post, so you should definitely read it for yourself because there's a lot of little details here and there. So yeah, but with that out of the way, let's actually get into it. First up, with the NPC weaknesses adjustment. Essentially, if you don't know, they are exaggerating some weaknesses of monsters based on elements, like you know, the earth spells or fire spells, range, you know, like light or heavy ammo or melee, you know, the stab and slash and crash and those types of styles. They made that change to specifically ranged and magic a while ago. Melee always had it, but yeah, essentially this time around they're actually changing some monsters, and they are essentially exaggerating some of those weaknesses in order for some things to become a little bit more viable in certain monsters and certain places. Honestly, I already thought that this was a good change back in the day, and you know, yeah, honestly, adjusting them to be a little bit more pronounced makes stuff, you know, more worth it in the long term. It's very good. They also actually increase the flat damage some monsters actually take, so more weapons become more viable. Essentially, the flat damage is essentially like if a monster has flat armor of 2, for example, they just take 2 less damage, right? Of like, let's say that your max hit is 50 and the monster has a flat armor of 2, because it's flat, right? Your max hit is gonna be 48, right? So they changed that, some of those things around in order for certain things to become you know, a little bit more viable in certain places. Honestly, like, they actually put out the entire list of all of the monsters that are going to be affected, between just regular monsters, slayer monsters, you know, bosses and stuff like that. I'm not gonna go over through the entire list, obviously, but I actually got my attention drawn by a person because of the giant mole change. So it actually used to be weak to water, right? And they actually want to change it to earth, and I have no idea why. I mean, moles are constantly on the ground, they survive on the ground, so you know, their skin is pretty much just adjusted to being on the ground. So honestly, any other weakness here would make more thematic sense. Like even water, for example, I actually have no idea why they're changing from water to earth. I think that earth is a bit, you know, needing of certain weaknesses to be more viable, but I think thematically speaking, some monsters just don't really make sense. Personally, I think they should actually follow a sort of pseudo-elemental system, so you don't need to actually give each monster an element, but let's pretend that you give them an element, or like if you had to categorize them in an element, you would categorize them in an element, even if, you know, they don't actually have that element, and then, you know, you have a certain element to counter it. So, for example, we are assuming that the giant mole has an element here, right? Giant mole doesn't have an element, but let's assume that giant mole has an element, which here would, you know, the element that would be the most appropriate would be essentially the earth element, right? So what is weak to earth, right? Or what is earth rather weak to? You know, since that's gonna be the element of the giant mole. Water? Sure, then, you know, whatever, you know, like water spells, things, they are strong against, you know, earth spells, right? But then what about monsters that have, you know, the water element? You know, let's say that they're actually weak to air, and then air monsters are weak to fire, and then fire monsters are weak to earth, right? Like, this overall just makes more sense, and it's easier to actually justify elemental weaknesses while staying thematic to them, right? Again, look, some monsters are not going to be super thematic with everything. Okay, sure, whatever, right? This is more of a gameplay change than a, you know, world building change, for sure, right? But this at least should give a very easy baseline for people to know what element they should be using, and, you know, like, if they know what element the monster is, like, for example, if a monster is very obvious in terms of, okay, this monster is earth element, for sure, right? Then they are weak to water, right? So I know that I need to use water without necessarily needing to go into monster examines or the wiki or ask other players or whatever, right? Just something a little there that would make it easier for players to identify and make it overall more worth it to actually use. Like again, I think that this change was arbitrarily made just to make earth spells and the earth element better and make it more viable for content, but generally speaking I just don't think it's a good change thematically speaking for this monster specifically, right? I think the water was completely fine, so yeah, but that's pretty much it for these, you know, NPC weaknesses adjustments. Again, like the blog post has the entire list with the monsters and their weaknesses and stuff like that, as well as the proposed changes. You can go take a look, there's so many monsters there, that's why I don't want to go over all of it. Next up, we actually have the loot table changes. So essentially a couple of loot tables here and there are going to be a little bit adjusted. Unfortunately, it's not as big of a project as I wanted, and I definitely have some thoughts, because it kind of annoys me how Jagex just continuously nowadays nerfs drop tables when they have no care to do that when it came to a lot of the newer bosses that came to the game, especially after Zulrah. Every boss like just shit out supplies, especially skilling supplies, which devalue the entire thing, or you know, the fact that for the most part you just have mini games that are incredibly horrible for those supplies, right? Or the fact that you had the Slayer update, which in order to make some Slayer monsters more viable in terms of drop table, they just overpower them. Like gargoyles used to give you no GP at all pretty much, and nowadays they're just like they shit out GP constantly, you know. So or skilling supplies, right? So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that personally. I think that the drop tables definitely need way bigger nerfs, but yes, this is just a couple more adjustments towards that, and I definitely think that they should keep going in that direction. First of all, we actually have the Soul Wars nerf. Like, straight up, it's just gonna get nerfed. Like, most of the loot is gonna get gutted, and honestly fucking good. As much as I enjoy minigames, I do think that they should 100% be relegated to offering good rewards, generally good rewards, right, or be interesting training methods, and that's it. I think that any minigame that has way too good of a drop table is gonna get botted. That's exactly what happened to Soul Wars, and Soul Wars, for a minigame, had way too good of a fucking loot table, right? Like, you would get so many fucking runes, especially high-end runes. You would get stuff like Runite bolts or Eddy bolts, right? Like, it's just insane. It was disgusting, the loot they got. So honestly, this nerf is just fucking needed, and they took way too fucking long to actually do it, right? So this is a good nerf. Other than that, essentially, there's gonna be a couple of places here and there where some items are gonna be adjusted in terms of their rarity. So stuff like Torstol Seeds, for example, are a bit rarer rather than just costing, you know, like, I don't even know, like, I actually checked the price of a Renar not too long ago when it was like 6k or something, and I was like, wait, what the hell? Like, when I played the game, this was at least 10, right? So you know, making them a little bit more rare is definitely gonna increase the price of them a little bit. You know, some items are gonna essentially have a little bit of a, you know, they're gonna be kind of like replaced, but you know, so like, for example, instead of getting sharks, you know, you can get the basically like the Monic thing bait that came out with Yama, but for sharks, right? And some other items are basically going to be like replaced with other items. So for example, you're gonna have a 50-50% chance of getting manta rays or sharks at some bosses. I think it was Zulrah, you know, specifically. Again, like, you can check the Excel sheet for that, for all of this information. But yeah, essentially, this is very needed, but it's not just nerfs either, or adjustments. Actually, some monsters got replaced with actually better drops. Like, for example, the Thermonuclear Smoke Devil. Remember the Bullseye Lantern drop, which is pretty much fucking useless, right? That drop is like a 1 in 100 according to the wiki, and yeah, basically got replaced with 30 raw sharks, right? Or I don't know if they were raw specifically, but I know that it was 30 sharks, right? So, you know, it's a little bit better when it comes to certain parts, but overall it's an overall nerf, which I definitely do think that it's very, very needed. Next up, we actually have the ToA changes. This is actually a really big one, so let's actually get into it. The puzzle rooms actually had some changes. For the most part, I'm fine with them. I mean, the baboon room just kept being a problem. I think it's by far the least liked room in the entire raid by most people. It's just an annoying room to deal with, and there's a couple of RNG or a bit of RNG, and while it does have, in my opinion, the highest skill expression out of any puzzle room, at the same time, sometimes you just get shit spawns and or like you're in the wrong spot or whatever, and you just get the entire room like either completely ruined or it takes like an extra minute to finish it, and it's just like not very fun, right? So essentially they reduced 2 waves and made it so the shamans and the cursed baboons always take max damage, so you don't need to worry about accuracy when it comes to dealing with them. Basically, it does make it easier, but at the same time, like again, I doubt people actually care too much, since this room has always been cursed, it's always been people's least favorite, right? The Crocodile Tree Water room actually no longer scales linearly with the players, which makes it easier, but again, like I don't think it's exactly the type of room that people want to like be super skill expressive. It's just, you run to the other side, you go to the middle, you throw water, and you have like someone just freeze the crocodiles once they come around. That's pretty much it, so it's whatever. And the obelisk actually had its HP reduced in the Aka room, so you can actually take it down with one single fucking thing, right? Basically, you can one down it. That's the terminology that we use, without needing to go to or going past 99 mining, which is a huge change. Like I cannot tell you the amount of times I'm fucking sitting there, breaking the pillar, and then I missed a tick, and then it's just like, oh, I didn't fucking spec with the dragon pickaxe, so now like the obelisk is like at 1 HP, and I'm just sitting here and I can't, it's kind of annoying. So overall, I think these changes they do make the raid easier, but I do think, and definitely they make it way more consistent, but I do think that they are good changes, right? And then we also have some miscellaneous changes. So the big pot will actually be a fully working deposit box, which yeah, I mean, it's good, obviously. Primarily because since you get so many supplies there, you tend to actually need inventory space, and contrary to Chambers of Xeric, where you always have like a bank nearby, right, at least a private one, that you can like put gear and whatnot, especially to do prep and whatnot. Yeah, overall it's good. What I'm interested to know is, I'm interested to know how many players actually know about this, because I only know about this because I just randomly like clicked use a bunch of stuff in the lobby room, and essentially it asked me how many items of that I wanted to deposit, and I was like, oh, you can deposit stuff here. So I don't actually know if many players know about this like big pot actually being able to deposit things. I guess now it will become much better. The smelting, or wait, is it smelling or smelting salts? Whatever, the salts are basically reapplied when expiring, right? I think it's fine. I don't even like, I don't notice too much this change, because it's whatever. Like I think they reapply every few seconds anyway, so it's kind of like, it's basically an overload, so who cares? And any drain stats will actually be restored at the end of a boss fight, which I already thought they did. So I'm pretty sure that like at some point in ToA, like when you do defeat a boss, the stats get restored, right? So I guess here they changed it, so instead of you having to go to the lobby for your stats to be restored, they get restored right at the end of the boss fight. Because that's like the only way I can see the change actually making sense, because I do remember no, I'm not misremembering. Like I'm pretty sure that after the boss room, or like after a path, that your stats actually got restored, right? So I don't know. In any way, yeah, it's a good change. Whatever, it's fine. Unless you want to like specifically be more hardcore on the supplies, I guess, after the boss fights, right? And make sure that people ration them more. Which I think will actually be an interesting take, because right now people just take like the entire fucking gear there and just rely on like 2 fucking prayer bots in order to beat the entire raid. So and now for the bosses, which is actually like the big one, right? First up we have Baba. Basically the changes are, the protect from melee now mitigates all of the damage from the flying little boulder that Baba throws at you actually fully transfers to the rock you're standing next, rather than just being off. And essentially fewer baboons will actually spawn. This is actually good, because honestly at the low end Baba can be mostly fine, especially if you're overgeared for it, but at the high end it can be an absolute fucking RNG fest, right? It's just like Baba it's through prayer, so even if you're praying melee it only mitigates some of the damage, so you can have like just it 50s, 60s, sometimes even 70s, and there's no fault of your own. So sometimes Baba is so RNG, which is actually why most people tend to do this room actually first, right? Because it's the most like RNG boss, you know, or you know, I guess you can just use the Red Axe method, which kind of mitigates most of that anyway. So yeah, but for the most part, like you know, like to me, the best change is definitely the melee mitigating all of the damage. The other two are kind of fine, I don't even care that much about them. But man, I get that that was the way the boss was designed, you know, the fucking eating through prayer. But again, like, at Iron Rages, straight up just coin flipping the entire fight, because Baba will just destroy you or won't destroy you. It's literally a coin flip. So yeah, I think for Baba, good changes. Next up we have Akka. There's a couple of changes here. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but basically all of them just make the boss more consistent and easier. And I don't like that the boss is actually made easier. The raid already is most disliked out of the big three, you know, especially with how sort of like make or break the raid is. But you know, most of the dislike, at least personally, that it comes to ToA at Iron Rages is you either have like very specific like gear and very specific strats, or the raid at end is just so fucked because of the amount of damage that everything deals to you, and sometimes how little damage you deal to things, because the stats of monsters in the raid actually scale with the invocation, right? So I think, to me, that's like the biggest problem with the raid, and it's definitely like the biggest contentious point. So I don't think making these bosses easier is necessarily that good, you know? So personally, I'm not a huge fan of it. Like, I get it, they make the raid more consistent and whatnot, but in a way, what people enjoy about raids like, you know, Chambers of Xeric, for example, is that adventure aspect of getting different rooms every time and whatnot. Obviously, in ToA, you cannot do that, but again, I don't think that making the bosses more predictable and more consistent is necessarily gonna, like, help with that, especially because it just seems that some of the mechanics are being very, very damped down years down the line, which, you know, like, again, I don't think people have a problem with the mechanics themselves, right? Yeah, then we have Kefri, which mostly just add changes to the scarabs, just to make it a bit less RNG, especially when it comes to like the accuracy, because sometimes, especially at higher invocations, you can be eating, especially like the mage scarab, for example, and you're just eating it and you're just eating zeros. It's not fun, especially when it just fucking throws like a nuke at you. Right, it's not fun to fucking get nuked by the mage scarab and get comboed out and just die. It's really not fun. So overall, just nice changes. And lastly, we have Zebak, where waves no longer push you back, but deal 30% more damage. Again, I actually don't think this is a good change, and just makes the boss easier. What they could do is make the waves actually push you back, but they only push you back once, so you actually don't feel like you're stun locked, because currently what happens is a wave pushes you back and then you just keep getting knocked and knocked and knocked and knocked until the water, right? So, you know, it a bit feels bad. So I think the change that I would make, especially to not make the mechanic obsolete, because making the waves not push you just makes part of the mechanic obsolete and turns the mechanic from a mechanic you actually need to dodge into a mechanic that just deals damage now, right? So I'm not a huge fan of this personally. Just make the waves still push the player like 2 tiles or something, or like 3 tiles, and they get like stunned. But they can, like, they gain a certain immunity to the other waves for a small period of time, so they can actually like move and try and dodge the next one, right? And the wave that pushed them either like disappears for that player, or like no longer pushes you or something, right? Just the wave affects you once, no longer affects you. I think that's much better, you know. It helps the fucking annoyance sometimes that is the absolute fucking stun locking that is the waves, right? Especially if you fucking miss it, and it doesn't completely remove the mechanic from the boss, because right now this is exactly what's doing. It's just removing the mechanic from the boss, right? Which doesn't help, because, you know, while people in high invocations might actually dodge the waves and everything, when you are in low invocation, the waves are not going to do that much damage to begin with, right? Because it's low invocation. So I think they're going to basically be teaching the players that instead of dodging this mechanic, you just sit there and tank it to deal as much DPS as you can, right? Because it doesn't deal that much damage. But then at higher invokes, it will just deal so much damage, and players are like, wait, but I got taught that this mechanic doesn't do anything, right? Not to mention that you make the entire like swimming part of the raid, right? The little sides where you can swim, completely like dead content, because there's no reason for anyone to go there anymore, right? So personally, not a fan of this. I would rather them just make it so it's easier to, you know, just essentially prevent further mistakes, or like fix your mistake, right, after getting fucked over by a wave, rather than just completely removing the mechanic. So yeah, other than that, we have changes to the loot. Yes, that's right, they don't feel that the Fang should be worth only 10 million, and I agree. Honestly, this is something that I actually think should have been done like ages ago, which is replacing the Fang with a Ward in terms of drop rate, because right now the two most common drops are the Lightbearer and the Fang. The Fang is way too OP. Like, it's a crazy OP weapon that is just way too frequently, like, dropped. When you compare it to the Ward is way more situational, right? It's not as, like, good, because especially it's not a weapon, it's an offhand, right? So, the Ward is much more situational than the Fang, and yet the Fang is way more common. Because the Fang here, the problem is, the Fang is best in slot in some places, and if it's not best in slot in some places, it's a close second. Like, the Fang is actually, like, really good, especially when you don't have those, you know, crazy expensive fucking scythe or whatever, right? Like, the Fang is incredibly fucking good as a weapon, especially considering its accuracy. So, you know, to me, it's a bit weird that they never made that change, and definitely that is a change that I think they should make. Also, I honestly wish they would just nerf drop rates across the board. It's kind of crazy that the drop rate for purples in like 500 invocation is like 1 in 4 or something like that, right? The raid doesn't feel as punishing as the other two, and definitely doesn't feel as, you know, it doesn't require as much as the other two, right? ToB, you can solo it, sure. The vast majority of people are not gonna fucking solo ToB. Right, the vast majority of people are gonna do trios, you know, fucking groups of 4, groups of 5 or whatever, right, maybe even a duo, but they're not fucking gonna grind the raid by soloing it, right? Generally speaking, you want to have other players, and requiring other players to do one piece of content is gonna make things way more rare, and even then, like, I don't think that doing especially the art version of ToB actually it drops as much or as high of a drop rate as ToA does, right? And Chambers, you know, you need kind of like a really high skill level as well to do it solo, but again, like, most people don't solo it because it's just easier to do with other people, but again, you need other people. And even then, right, even when you do CMs, the drop rate of purples there just isn't as common as it is in ToA. So I definitely think that across the board they should just nerf it, especially because we're talking about like we're talking about Fang here and Lightbearer, right, which are the two most common drops, but every drop suffers from that. The Ward is incredibly cheap, the Missouri is incredibly cheap, and even the Shadow's price is incredibly cheap. The Shadow is one of the most overpowered weapons, and I would say the most overpowered out of the entire, like, max set, right, the trio max set between the Scythe, Twisted Bow, and Shadow, right? The Shadow is the best one. Right, you can apply the Shadow in so many fucking places, right? Nowadays, okay, with the buffs that the Scythe had, maybe the Scythe is like better, but still, the Shadow is actually the cheapest. The Shadow costs 1.1 bill, T-Bow has dropped down a little bit to like 1.4-ish, the Scythe is around 1.6 at the moment, right? And the Shadow has been the cheapest since ToA pretty much came out, and it's actually because you get so many purples, right? You just get so many purples. I think definitely they should just nerf drop rates across the board and switch the drop rate of the Fang and the Ward, right? I get it, you know, it's gonna suck, especially for Iron Man, but I think it's just better for the health of the game, because again, like, a Fang costing 10 mil is absolutely insane, right? Like, imagine, for example, what's this, or, yeah, like, in terms of, like, keep in mind, like, this costs less than Bandos, for example, right? And Bandos isn't as OP as a Fang. Like, just imagine having a Bofa, right, but instead of costing 100 mil, it costs 10, with how OP the Bofa is, right? It's like, it's way too OP for the price that it has, and it comes from drop rates just being incredibly common, as well as the Fang being mostly dropped when compared to other weapons. So yeah, but we're not done yet, because we have other combat changes, which mostly goes over a couple of other bosses. Honestly, a lot of them I haven't either I haven't done them yet, or I just don't have much experience with them, so I'm mostly going to avoid them. But essentially you add changes to Fuzani's Nightmare, next Huhei Coatl, Perilous Moons, and Dux Celis. These are the changes of bosses that I'm not going to read because I have either very limited experience in the case of, for example, Nex or Waiko Coatl, right? Or, you know, in the case of Fazani's Nightmare, I haven't killed the boss yet, so I'm not gonna talk about them. But we also have changes to other bosses that I actually will talk about. First of all, Jagex talked about wanting to add a new defensive ring to the Ranged Archaeologist, which is the boss in the game that doesn't really have anything like super fancy to it. It's a nice idea, but I genuinely hope that they don't make it more OP than the Suffering. The Suffering currently mostly is used for recoil rings, right, because it's an infinite recoil ring. I mean, it's not infinite, you need to charge it, but still, it's an infinite recoil ring. But the Suffering is actually really good as well, because as a defensive ring, it does have tremendous heavy lifting. Like, right now, it's the best defensive ring in the game. So I really hope that Jagex doesn't fucking completely ruin it, especially considering that you need a fucking Zenite for the Ring of Suffering, right? So I really hope they don't completely crash it, because right now the Suffering, as much as it is a recoil ring, a glorified recoil ring, it also does feel that niche of being a defensive ring, right? Even, for example, when I'm doing Chambers of Zarek, I currently don't have the other rings, and even if I did, like with the quality of gear that I have, I still don't think that I would take all of the other rings or whatever, right? So the Suffering, even with the recoil disabled, it's a good defensive ring to take with you, right? So I really hope they didn't completely fuck that over, right? Because you know, like, please, you need a fucking pretty high level, and you know, I don't even know how much Zenites cost, but they cost still over 10 mil, I think, so, you know. On top of that, we also have Cerberus changes. The lava pools now will only affect the tile that they actually spawn, which is actually a good thing, because I was super confused when learning the boss, because the visual cue was only one tile, but if you stand next to it, you also took damage, so a bit shit. You have a better drop rate on the Keymaster teleport scrolls, as well as them being tradable to be more in line with the rest of the teleport scrolls from other bosses, which, good, yeah, thanks. Took a few years, but thanks. And the Word of Arceus actually reduces the prayer draining from the ghost by 30%. So according to my calculations, this would mean that every ghost, instead of doing 30 prayer points of damage, would only do 20, right? So instead of needing 90 prayer points, or, you know, close to it, or close, or, you know, more than 60, which is the required amount to not take any damage, right? You need like 40 something, 41 or whatever. So yes, this actually is a reduction for all demons, but mostly for ghosts. It also stacks with the spectral sigil, so that's good. Because, yeah, look, the problem with Cerberus that I always had, and the reason as why I don't like grinding this boss, is simply because the long trips are like 2 kills or 3 kills. It's really annoying. Or sometimes they're like 8 or 9, purely based on a DPS check. Because if you kill Cerberus and you have high enough hits, you'll kill the boss fast enough that it won't spawn the ghosts, right? But if you take way longer, it will inevitably spawn the ghosts, and your prayer is just gonna be gone, right? Because you're gonna lose like at least 70 prayer points. Not 70, like 60. I mean, ideally it would be 61, but still, you know, like 60 something, right? And essentially, you then just have to check an entire prayer pot. Especially if you get better RNG and you get 2 ghosts in 1 kill, oh my god, the fucking, forget the trip is gone, right? On top of this, Cerberus also does plenty of damage, so you sort of need to have this balancing of prayer pots and food, but prayer pots can just completely evaporate, or if they don't evaporate, your food evaporates instead and you didn't bring enough. So overall, I do think that this is a really nice change, and because I think the ghost mechanic is just way too punishing in terms of prayer points, so yes, pretty good. And lastly, we actually have a change to Over and Briofita, specifically to the keys. Basically, they are no longer required to have the keys in order to be fought, right? They can just, you know, be fought whenever you want. They will still drop their keys if you fight them, but will actually have a reduced drop table. As for the keys, there is a chest you can open in the layer after defeating them. I actually didn't understand if you need to use 1 kill or like 1 key per kill, or if you can get like 1 kill and use multiple keys. I didn't quite understand that. I think it's 1 key per kill, that would make more sense. So yeah, but overall I think this is actually a really nice change. Thankfully, right, they didn't actually have just a regular drop table, right? So pretty much I'm glad that they actually have a very reduced drop table, and as far as I know, the regular drop table doesn't drop like the unique drops that they have. You need the keys specifically, they only come from like the chest or whatever, because the chest is gonna have the regular drop tables that they have now, right? And then when you can fight them all the time without the keys are gonna have the regular drop tables, and they will have a reduced drop table, right? So I'm really glad that they actually thought about that, because I was about to see just a fucking mid-game item completely just obliterated in terms of price, right? So that's pretty good. As a whole, it's whatever. Like, as for the bosses themselves, I don't care too much. I think they're gonna be nice for mid players, for like early level, mid-level players to like especially practice some mechanics and whatnot. So overall, positive change. And finally, we arrived to the fucking minor changes. I'm not gonna go over all of them, but more importantly, and the ones that I think are good to highlight, the halberds can actually eat flying enemies, which actually gives them more valuable, without making necessarily melee, best in slot in every place, and still thematic, right? I mean, if you have a long-ranging weapon, okay, technically spears are also long range, so but still, like, at least halberds do have a little bit more of a use, even if they're not like perfect. The demon bane weapons actually work on the ice demon. I'm actually not sure if this is going to be any use. Most people I know either just debow it, just use normal like ranged attacks, or use fire spells, because ultimately bringing demon bane weapons, it's an other inventory slot that you sacrifice for a very minor thing, right? Especially because it's Ice Demon. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm gonna bring a spec weapon that's gonna be useful throughout the entire raid. Or it's not like, for example, oh, I'm gonna bring a ZGS to spec the Mutadiles, right? So we don't actually need to lose time eating the tree or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, especially because the Fire Surge, or, the Fire Spells will still be best in slot there, right? And the T-Bow still slaps really fucking hard. So I'm not sure how it's gonna be used, but hey, people have options, that's good, right? They're also going to add an indicator for the Vestige progress at the Desert Treasure 2 bosses. Basically, DT2 bosses have sort of this dry protection on Vestiges, where you can, like, you roll 2 empty rolls and then you roll a 3rd roll for the Vestige, right? Basically, it's just gonna make that visible to the players. Players with a Zakelm will actually have the effects on being on task when fighting Tazars for the speedrunners out there. Personally, this is a band-aid fix, entirely band-aid fix. As I've mentioned in the past, speedrunning worlds would be way better for this, right? So you don't need specific gear, you don't need to pay for supplies, you don't need to have specific, like, little things here and there. Like, you want to speedrun, the fucking Fight Caves or the Inferno, you can just do it. Just like how right now, if I want to speedrun quests, I don't need to create a new account, right? So personally, a bit of a shame, because this is just straight up a band-aid fix. I would have preferred way more for this to be like in a speedrunning world where people can actually choose their loadout in terms of like the gear that they want. They can switch if it's on task, on off task, or whatever, especially because there's also like a world record leaderboard for off task. And on top of that, there's other bosses that are speedrun that you can also be on task for like the best times, that are not gonna have this. Again, like, all of that could be fixed if you just had a speedrunning world, which you already have speedrunning worlds. This, to me, look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is a bad change, I'm just saying it's a band-aid fix to a much larger issue that they could actually take care of, right? And especially because a lot of people like to yap about speedrunning worlds being useless, blah 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 blah, that content. Hey, here's a fucking perfect opportunity to make them more used, right? Introduce bosses to it so speedrunners can actually, fucking speedrun on speedrunning worlds, So yeah, also and lastly, Thralls being spawned for 2 minutes, which is a reward for the Grandmaster tier, will actually be a Master reward instead, specifically because it's very impactful, and essentially it sucks for players to have to reobtain the GM tier before reobtaining the reward after the update. Personally, I think that that's basically the problem with these types of systems, right? You just need to do new content to basically get the reward that you wanted. So basically I just don't think that's very good. I've already talked about that in a video, in a achievement tires video, the problems that they have and everything. So personally, I think that a threshold system would work better. Basically, like, either, oh, you've done these bosses, you get these rewards, or maybe something related to, oh, like, we release batches of bosses, so right now we're releasing batches of bosses that have the combat achievements, but we don't have any reward for them yet, right? And then eventually we're gonna release the reward for them once we have enough of them or whatever, right? I think regardless, like I think other things would just be better systems than this, but still, you know, I guess it's a nice change, but again, it's kind of another band-aid fix to a much larger issue. And I mean, look, combat achievements used to be way fucking worse, right, before the point system came out, because, you know, I kind of predicted that, but, you know, but yes, you can go watch those videos if you want, but yeah, that's pretty much it, I think, for this run. I think I've talked about, again, like, I sort of glossed over some things, because I didn't want to, like, talk about everything, and definitely I could talk way more about certain topics here, but I just kind of wanted to make an overall sort of opinion piece, I guess, on it. So yeah, actually tell me your thoughts down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.